Happy New Year to our viewers and welcome to the show once again. A major issue topping government's agenda for 2024 in Nigeria is how to restore peace and build conflict resolution mechanisms in many parts of the country in the wake of rising insecurity and killings. The spate of violence has painted Nigeria in very bad light, making it extremely difficult for government to attract foreign investments and achieve many of its development objectives. The situation only last week prompted the Senate to summon the entire gamut of Nigeria's security architecture, as service chiefs, following the Christmas Eve massacre by suspected herdsmen militia in communities within Plateau State, north central Nigeria, which left over 200 people killed. Much of these conflicts have been linked to competition for scarce resources, mostly land or seemingly irreconcilable differences, with many individuals, groups and communities resorting to violence as the last resort. Now, the use of force has destroyed millions of lives, livelihoods and property over conflict that should and could have been prevented, managed or resolved amicably. Only this Friday, some irate women protesting the fallout of the recent killings in some Plateau communities burnt down the residence of the district head of Boko's town, Michael Adanchi. The women are said to have been angered by the arrest of some members of the community for their alleged involvement in the killings and the alleged lackluster attitude shown by their traditional ruler towards their plight. Now, as 2024 begins to take steam, the federal government is prioritizing peaceful means towards conflict resolution in the new year, as many Nigerians anticipate more challenges due to the rising insecurity and turbulent socio-economic challenges facing the nation ahead. Well, to help us understand the issues, especially what can be done by the federal government in a search for peace, we have joining us in the studio the Director General of the Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution, IPCR, Dr. Joseph Ochogwu. And IPCR is a federal government agency. Thank you so much for joining us, and Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year, and thanks. Nice to be the Arise studio.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.
Now, it's a turbulent year ahead because of the security challenges we've seen and then mounting economic challenges. The more government is working, the more Nigerians are saying that little is being done considering our population. Now, issues that could have been resolved amicably have been heightened. The competition for scarce resources, whether in terms of agriculture or in terms of economy or industry and all of that, is leading to lots of conflicts here and there. What's the federal government's agenda for a peaceful resolution of some of these issues instead of taking up arms against either the state or fellow citizens?
Thank you very much. I think that it's regrettable, that some of the conflicts we are having are becoming more recurrent and frequent. They seems to be becoming more protracted and a little bit intractable. But that being as it is, there is no conflict that is not resolvable. And then it's important to and instructive to mention that conflict is part and parcel of any human existence. The conflict that we obviously frown at is a violent conflict, which tend to lead to loss of lives and property and then sets us on the development reverse. And I think that with the government coming to power, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's government coming to power in May 29, it was very clear. If you listen carefully to most of his statements that he's been making, especially the first 1 month, the level of consultation, negotiation and engagement and dialogue, that he engaged with different stakeholders, I think is one major step in the right direction in terms of resolving whatever differences, in the society in a very amicable and peaceful way. Because those are the tools, issues around negotiation, dialogue, stakeholders, consultations, and a sense of inclusion. That is the pathway, to go to resolve conflicts in a non-violent way. And if you look at his 8 priority areas, one of the key things you find there, you find inclusion, and you find rule of law, you find economic growth, you find poverty eradications. All these tools are actually pathways to resolving contradictions, and violent conflicts in the society in a non-violent way. So I think that there is a very clear directive, on where the federal government want to set the country towards, resolving some of these complex differences, and
some
contradictions.
People call them intractable conflicts.
But if you look at the policies that have been put in place, it just tells you that there is a hope. There is a hope that these conflicts are going to be addressed. The reason why I said so is that, one, you have to look at the body language of the president, You have to look at his speeches, and then you have to look at his actions. Secondly, I think for me, I draw inspiration largely, from the statement of Her Excellency Oluremi Bola Tinubu in the inauguration speech he made in the church in the inaugural service, I think at the National Center, where she said, we came to serve. God has blessed us and we've come to serve. And I think that inspires me as an individual, as a Nigerian, and somebody having also holding a position of authority on behalf of the Nigerian people.
Yeah, but it looks like it's only the first family, because some other people in government don't look like they are here to serve. It looks like they're here to grab. No.
I think that you need to check, you need to investigate. And I will even urge you to investigate, including my agency and my department where I work. Because the point is that we've reached a point in this country where we have to tell ourselves the very hard truth. We are at a brink. And this particular government, this particular administration provides us this ample opportunity, for us to make a difference and change the narrative of where we are coming from.
To reset Nigeria?
To reset Nigeria on the path of security, growth, and prosperity. We have no choice. And it doesn't matter which sector you are working, either in the public sector, in the private sector, or even a faith-based organization. We need to run with the vision, that we have. And I think that the president too was very frank in terms of it's really going to be tough, but we need that collaborative and cooperative energy.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking like an academic who is in government and working towards this. But the politicians who come into government and get ministerial, governorship positions or others, they just don't seem to be going towards this way. And that's why there's this fear among Nigerians that looks like our politicians are behaving as if they live in a different world from that of the citizens.
No, I think that there is a way government work that I think that the media have not tend to understand the dynamics and how government work. I've been in the government cycle for over 20 years, in this peace and conflict resolution sector for over 20 years. I've worked in the institute. From the institute, I've worked in the villa, for 6 years with President Jonathan as well as President Buhari, and left back to the institute and left the institute to the British Department for International Development for 13 months and then rolled back to the institute. So there is a way the government system works. There is a political party, that gets up his manifesto, goes to the poll, wins election, and then comes in and inherits all government bureaucracies and structures, where you find the experts, the technocrats, the bureaucrats, and everybody. And their primary responsibility is to support whatever agenda, the president or the party that wins the election has constituted. And there is no alternative to that. So people must be held accountable to perform their roles, whatever roles they've been given, either as civil servants in any ministries, departments, and agencies. And I'm glad that there is a new innovation that is on now, which is called the Ministerial Performance Bond, which Mr. President signed with all the ministers. And I think that all the ministers also too are taxing, their different heads of department and agencies under them. What that means is that you have to align yourself, with the 8 priority areas of the government that I've just mentioned a few of them.
Okay, for example, let's take a look at the plateau issue, for example. Now, how is the federal government supposed to approach this issue so that it doesn't degenerate? And we've seen other security issues across the country. And we see just ministers going there and providing relief materials and so on. But people are saying, look, we need concrete solutions that wouldn't allow this to happen again. Not just relief materials. Yeah, as good as the relief materials are, but what do we do? Number one, to get the killers, and how do we prosecute the killers? How do we also ensure that those communities are safe? And what they are saying is that the government and its officials seems to be thinking for the people and not thinking along with the people.
Okay, I think the point to note particularly for the plateau crisis, and plateau crisis is not only in isolation, and I've mentioned this in several places, and I'm happy, that we are coming to a common ground to understand that there is a difference between conflict and criminality. And when criminals take advantage of our identity fault line, because once you have identity, there could be identity crisis, and as a result, there could be some conflict, which is resolvable. But when smart criminals decide to take advantage of these conflict fault lines, and then infiltrate communities and society to perpetuate criminal activity, not necessarily a conflict, then therefore we need to begin to deploy the right tools. We need to deploy the right tools, you know, to nip criminals at the bud.
And what are those tools? Because that's why I brought you here. How do we ensure that those communities are not infiltrated again? And if it's a problem between warring communities, or it's a problem between militias coming whether from outside or within the country, how do we stop those kind of things from happening? Because it's not just Plateau. Even in Cross River, we saw Cameroonian militias entering into Nigeria, and attacking communities, and then going away with kidnapped victims.
And I'll get to that. This is where we need to think smartly and creatively and innovatively to address our challenges. We must not run from it. And like I said, we are paid to think smartly for the government. All state actors, whether you're in the military sector, police sector, intelligence sector, or the academia, or the research sector, you know, you are paid by taxpayers, you know, to provide solutions. So we are solution providers. It therefore means that we have to think smartly, you know, to be able to engage these elements, you know, and take them on board and ensure that the well-being and welfare of our citizens are guaranteed. So the point I'm trying to make now is that we have to first and foremost look at what our political structures are. Where are the deficit lines? Where are the fault lines? And if you look at it, for example, at the federal government level, you find governance, you find checks and the three arms of governments are working. You know, if you go at the state level, in most of the states it's a bit weak. You know, if you go at the local level, which is where most of these problems take place, you know, there is a very weak local governance system in Nigeria.
Some people say near absence of government at the local level. It
is obviously near absence of local governments in Nigeria. So how do we begin to reinvent what the 3 tiers of government means? And what are the roles that the local government needs to perform? The governor cannot be in all the local government areas. We have 774 local government areas. Aside the 774 local government areas, there is a very wide, large swath of land between the different wards and the local government headquarters. So who policies those places? What is the sense of inclusion and governance, you know, at the ward level, you know, to the local government headquarters level? So those are the kind of things we need to do. And I think that we need to take this thing back to the citizens in terms of the inclusion that we are talking about, you know, to get the people included in their security, you know, and what are the dynamics that we need to play out. I mean, if it's, we need to really up our ante.
Yeah, and that's why some people are already saying that we should allow citizens to bear arms. While others are calling for some groups, vigilante groups or whatever it is called, community vanguards, like some governors are doing, to be set up and properly kitted to secure the environment, because it looks like the central security architecture is not working for everyone.
No, the point to note is that I think that one, we need to invest more in our policing system. We need to decentralize our policing system. We need to make accountability and responsibility decentralized.
Does that include bearing arms,
within the policing
allowing
system?
citizens to bear arms?
The Firearm Act does not forbid you from carrying arms. All you need to do is to get a license from the Commissioner of Police to get a pump-action rifle or a double-barrel rifle. The firearms law is very clear about that.
Yeah, but citizens cannot actually afford some of these firearms.
You know, why we need to be careful is the fact that once you have high level of violence, crime, and violence conflict, you know, in a society, the next thing you're going to be having is the commodifications of violence, you know, and the tools of violence, you know, and then that will increase illicit acquisition, you know, of firearms, you know, and light weapon. So we need to first and foremost look at the political angle. How do we get the local government systems to work? How do we get justice, you know, equity, fairness, even at the local government level?
And are you speaking to those in government about some of these solutions you're proffering?
There are some component of it that even Mr. President cannot do much about because of the structure of our constitutions and what the policies and procedures and processes in our constitutions make provisions. The president governs overall Nigeria, not particular states. But I think that it is now time for subnational government level, you know, to look at what their peculiarities and challenges are and find very ground empirical evidences, you know, to understand some of these issues. Because what some people run with are largely anecdotal evidences. You know, so like I just mentioned to you now that there is a difference between conflict and crime. Because if you don't understand it, the tools you're going to deploy is going to be different tools altogether.
So what's the major difference between both?
No, the difference is that for conflict, it's a difference, between one person and another. That is perhaps has led to a point whereby we cannot agree and we decide to go into
like the
violent action.
Clashes,
like, for example, the farmer header crisis. I can assure you that if you go to Bukos right now, you still see headers.
Yeah, but there are also talks here and there that people are using the opportunity to steal solid minerals that are in those communities.
Listen to me.
Under the guise of communal issues.
Just listen to me now. If you say header militia, which I see captured, in the highlight, you've made a profile. Invariably, what you are saying is that every header, should be hated by a farmer. And that is not true. We've done a couple of interventions years ago with the Nigerian Stability and Reconciliation Program funded by the DFID, implemented by British Council. I happen to oversight some of those projects. And we have what we call the Bokos Community Dialogue on land water usage, between farmers and headers. That you can address. But the criminality angle of it, when criminals infiltrate community to either steal from farmers or steal from headers.
Or steal from the state through the solid minerals that are deposited in some of those communities.
And that is why we need to take specific line of action, because we are beginning to see, in our literature and observation that illicit mining, of our mineral resources is increasingly stoking violent conflict, and violence, across the country. So, and I'm happy that the Ministry of Solid Mineral have recently banned all forms of license in terms of whatever cadastral mapping, and mining rights, that have been given to be suspended for now. I think that mining is a big resources also that the government does not need to just leave, in the hands of all players. It should be well regulated.
Yeah, well, this government says it's part of the agenda that they have.
It is. Yeah, and I think that they are taking it seriously.
Yeah, I mean.
I think that too, that it's a cross-cutting issue that we all need to work together, not just a one-line ministry thing. It has to be a lot of collaboration and synergy among other actors, to really understand the issues and how to regulate it.
Thanks so much, Dr. Ochogwu. Now, the next part of it that I'm going into is the economy. Lots of people are stranded in terms of their well-being. The economy is overheating. I mean, we aren't having enough investment. People are going out of jobs. And this is leading to lots of crises, conflicts in homes, husbands and wives, fathers and children, and all of that. And instead of some of these things being settled amicably, we're seeing the divorce rates going high. We're seeing crime and criminality, I mean, just like you said earlier, going high, petty crimes and all of that. How does the government address this as we get into 2024? Because especially with the budget, this is the first full year budget that President Tinubu will be implementing.
Absolutely. I think that Nigeria is not isolation of the global economic crisis. We need to note that. And I think that thus far we've been able to manage, incrementally, some of the very huge deficits, that the COVID pandemic as well as...
but other countries have gone out of it and they are getting better.
As well as the global recession.
Our system is getting weaker.
As well as the global recession has led us. Also note that we have a very atavistic political system, whereby we don't allow government to settle. And that's the truth. And that is very sad.
What do you mean by that?
With the kind of democratic practice, that we practice in this country. I mean, in most nation states who practice democracy, particularly evolutionary and transitional democracy, once a government is constituted, you allow the government to reign. And if you're in the opposition, what you do is that you proffer alternative solution that the government can itself buy. Because once a government is constituted, it's government of all, not a government of a party. So all citizens, all groups must align, to ensure that we make a success out of it. And I'm saying this based on my personal experiences, having worked, within the government sector and see the way, citizens work against government in power to fail.
How?
To fail.
How do you mean? Because they are supposed to offer credible opposition through providing alternatives, and they do. And most times the government just jettisons it.
No, for example, when opposition forces decide to begin to stoke violence in certain aspects, in certain areas, in terms of criminalization, all those things happen. So the point I'm trying to note is that
that's why you have the government, and if people are found guilty, whether they belong to the opposition or ruling party, they should be dealt with.
Absolutely. You see, that is why you talked about issues around the social the social dislocation as a result of economic difficulties and all that. I think that those are real things, and I'm going to tell you how to address it. First and foremost, at a personal level. At a personal level, this government have come with a renewed hope agenda. So, what they are telling you is that first and foremost, don't lose hope. Have a hope in yourself first and foremost as a human being that you can make a success of your life, irrespective of where you find yourself. So you need that hope as a human being to be alive. Don't give up hope. So I think that is a very key message coming from the government in power. The second level of it is that have hope in the place where you work.
That's for those who have jobs.
That's for those who have job. And if you don't have job, have hope in your skills and the fact that tomorrow can be better. It means tomorrow you can get a job. Because you see, a lot of some of these things we do, there are spiritual elements to it. It doesn't matter whether we do science research and all that, but there are spiritual component of it, particularly for those of us who do peace work. So you need that level of hope first and foremost, that level of self-confidence, that level of self-deliverance, what I call self-deliverance, to have hope in yourself and have hope in the supernaturality in terms of God, that there is a tomorrow that is going to be better. So if you find a government that have provided an agenda called Renewed Hope Agenda, how do you as a citizen, log into that wider ambition, that wider template, to begin to navigate yourself through the complex labyrinth, of the social dislocation that you are talking about.
Yeah, but the believability index of the government is based on if the government starts implementing what it has said it
you see,
to do.
The point is that, okay, I'll just give you one typical example now. What is on ground even before this government? Let's look at education. The federal government policy on education is that every Nigerian citizen must have the basic education from primary school, secondary school, junior secondary school. That is, you have that free level of education. The point now is that how many citizens are taking advantage of that? And note too that we have a very high number out of school dropout or rate of out of school children. So the point now is that how do we engage these kind of challenges? So in the Renewed Hope agenda, the point will be that faith-based organization, civil society organization, and NGOs and other groups, and state governments that are responsible for education, universal basic education, state state universal basic education, they must really come together to ensure that this thing drops maximally. So, and like I told you when I started, I say public office is a place for problem solving. It is not a place for showmanship.
Well, in Nigeria, it looks like it's a place for relaxation.
It's
and
then
looting. You see instances where people are given public trust, and then the abuse of public trust is everywhere. You see the allegations every now and then.
I think that
for example, let's take one of the key ministries that the Nigerian government is supposed to use to reduce poverty in the country, the humanitarian social investment programs. Both in the previous government and then in the new government, there are talks here and there of alleged mismanagement, misappropriation of resources.
Let me.
And this makes the people to lose hope in government officials and programs.
You see, that's why the narrative is a bit different. I'm not a spokesperson for
but we're talking about peace and conflict resolution and the poor performance of government in providing social services, amenities, and all of that also leads to distrust that will make people to get into violent means.
No, let me tell you now. For example, there is something that is out there that ordinarily me as a public servant, I find it very odd. For example, they said there is a memo, of about 500 something million naira, to the Accountant General to pay. Accountant General does not pay no money to anybody's any personal account. They release money to ministries. I hope you are getting the point. And then the ministries' accounting systems are the ones that deploy certain things. So when you find certain things, out there that doesn't sync well,
so
then
you say that those kind of documents are actually forged, or
I'm only telling you how it works.
Or what's it?
No, I'm only telling you how these things work.
Okay.
So the office of the Accountant General, for example, cannot pay that kind of money to anybody's account. It doesn't work that way. There is what they call the GIFMI system. where all the systems are out there. And with the Freedom of Information Act, you can go there and check these things. So we must leave this angle of rumor, propaganda.
Yeah, but the minister didn't deny.
Stuff,
the minister didn't deny issuing that.
But I'm only telling you that.
Yeah, and then the Accountant General Ado has said that, look, that system
never would have happened.
Yeah, I mean, so
never would have happened.
The investigators are out there. That's why the institutions like EFCC.
System, there is no way it would have happened.
Okay, so but what I'm saying is that there's a low believability in government at the moment. Politicians get into power. Agencies of government or ministries that are meant to solve people's problems, instead of focusing on the issues, are not doing much. And so people are losing hope. And before you know it, people vent their anger against fellow citizens, against the state, rising crime everywhere. How do we resolve these issues? Because it's leading to the rising conflicts in Nigeria.
That if you look at the problem that is on ground, like I told you, we are at a brink. We are at a brink. So there is no time for fanfare. It is time for most public officials in positions of responsibility to fold their sleeves, and get down to work and ensure that we deliver to the people. The reason why I'm saying this is that if there is always deficit in our delivery capacity as a government, there's going to be a huge challenge. So that is why I have a belief, and I mobilize as much as we can to ensure that we are able to reverse this ugly trend and run with it. Because the president cannot be everywhere. Even the governors cannot be everywhere. Even me, as a DG of a government agency, I can't be everywhere. And I'll tell you something, and you'll be surprised, that even in a place where I'm familiar with for over 20 years, once I got my appointment, I didn't go anywhere for 2 good months to try to understudy the place and be able to hold people accountable to deliver on certain things that they need to deliver. And it has to be a continuous work in progress. So my point is that the public service system need to up even its sanctioning mechanism. That is, work based on the rules and the regulation to ensure that people deliver. Because there are people who hide under the cover of bureaucracy and do all sorts of things and all that.
Yeah,
we must be able to beat that and ensure that people deliver.
There's a poor belief in the superstructure of the federal government, for example. A lot of people just think people get into government at the federal level and just move monies around and not really take care of citizens.
I've been there for over 20 years, and I can tell you that I don't see that kind of money.
Okay, so as you try to...
I worked in the villa as well, I can tell... I'm just being honest with you.
Yeah, so as we try to round off this conversation very quickly, what do you think should be the priority areas that President Tinubu should focus on to reduce the tension in the country? Because we are seeing tension everywhere, economically, politically, even psychologically for citizens. Every Nigerian you see on the street is under some form of economic or political or whatever tension. So how can the president, do something to reduce the tension?
I think that first and foremost is the issue of economic growth. And then the second component is how do we engage our youths, who are grossly unemployed and littered across the nooks and crannies of the country. That will need the National Executive Council to have a conversation. And then, secondly, we need to look at how we deliver on certain things. It is not everything, I think, personal. Now, this is a personal opinion now. It's not everything that we must deliver based on contract. There are certain things we must deliver based on direct labor. In a country that have very huge unemployed youths, littered everywhere, we must engage them in our road construction, in our rail constructions, and get some of these things done. If we don't do that, we are building a very large pool of people, and this frustration you are talking about will continue. The aggression too will continue, and then we'll have more business, to do in terms of the security agencies and all that. So we need to open up. We need to open up more of the economy and then use our inclusion to that to ensure that there is economic inclusion. Because once you do inclusion at the economic level, you are closing the gap, between the rich and the poor. And then you are giving the people to a sense of belonging so that the people, are not outpriced out of the system.
So is the IPCR providing some sort of direction, policy direction, alternatives to the government too in terms of what they should do to reduce all this heightened conflict everywhere?
Absolutely. What we are doing is we are providing some good level of policy advisory. Policy advisory in the sense that when you look at certain conflict areas or crime areas, that the underlying issues oftentimes are this level of economic issues, which has to do with unemployment. So if you grow the economy, you're going to take a large number of populations, away from, being violent actors. And then you give them a sense of inclusion and a sense of belonging within the system. And then you can reduce that. And then in terms of security too, you now reduce the level of things that goes towards the security angle to ensure that peace-building mechanisms and peace-building processes and innovations are put in place to ensure that we have a peaceful society. And
maybe reorganize the security architecture of the country, because the last time we ever did one was in the 80s by former military head of state, General Ibrahim Babangida. People are calling for, the dismantling of the security architecture and do something, build institutions that work. Do you think that the institutions that we have are also contributing to peaceful resolution?
You see,
because it looks like people are just asking for monies to buy weapons, and if that continues, then that means we will have conflicts with us for a long period of time.
No, I think that I've mentioned something that is very key here. The deficit in the local governance system. I've interacted with very good people within the military security and the policing sector, who have capacity to do stuff. There is no doubt that we need to think more smarter than our conflict entrepreneurs as well as our criminal groups. We need to think more intelligently. We need to deploy the right creative and innovative tools to beat them at it. And I think that this is the time for us to experiment on ideas. Ideas rule the world. So we shouldn't be shy to experiment certain things.
Okay, very interesting.
So we need this level of innovations and creativity, to be able to do these things and then get it going.
Yeah, you've mentioned one very key statement there that I really loved, the issues of conflict entrepreneurs. There are so many of them in the country. And of course, we hope that the security agencies will continue to do their part. But of course, the political office holders too also need to do their part. Absolutely. And I hope they follow advisories from organizations like yours, the Institute for Peace and Conflict Research. Well, we must thank you so much, Dr. Joseph Ochogwu is the Director General of the Institute for Peace and Conflict Research, which is a federal government-based organization here in the Nigerian capital, Abuja. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.